Hey guys, what's up? Shin0525 here, coming at you with another video. And today's video, I want to recount the console wars from someone who's actually lived through it. Now that Xbox is pretty much dead, Halo is now on PlayStation. That is like the GameStop put out their end of console wars notice on X. Even Donald Trump and the White House commented on the ending of the console wars. Now that it's officially over, I just want to go back and kind of recap it as like someone who's actually lived through the console wars. So the modern day console wars really started between Nintendo and Sega. That's kind of where like the whole console war idea came from. Because back in the 90s, you had Sega with like their Sega Genesis, and then you had Nintendo with their Super Nintendo system, and they were competing with each other, and they were like big rivals. And it was really just this big race between like Nintendo and Sega. And Sega was kind of like the underdog, where Nintendo had a huge share in the home console market, but Sega was able to break through and with like the Sega Genesis, Master Systems, and really give Nintendo a run for their money. And you could see like the console wars heat up in like the advertising, where Nintendo or Sega would make their like ads with Sega does what Nintendo don't, and Nintendo would fire back with ads of their own saying that they're better than the Sega brand, and it would go back and forth. And now this console war would last pretty much all of the 90s. It would have ended when the Dreamcast kind of failed, and it forced Sega to go into just third-party publishing. So that's where the Dreamcast failed, didn't sell enough. A lot of stuff was against Sega when the Dreamcast came out. So Sega fell, Nintendo was left on top, won that first battle of the console wars. Sega became a third-party publisher, and then we'd later see games like Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 get ported to the GameCube. And that was a big thing. That was just as big as like Master Chief and Halo going to Sony. So that was pretty big. But during the end of the console wars, Nintendo wanted to make a CD-based console or an attachment for the Nintendo 64, and then they wanted to make like a CD-based console just in general. So they teamed up with Sony to make one, and they got really far into production with this partnership with Sony to make a CD drive for the Nintendo 64. But at the very last second, Nintendo backed out and left Sony with a bunch of these like CD playing devices that were basically set up for like a game system. So when Nintendo pulled out at the last minute, Sony looked at all the shit that they had, and they're like, we're pretty much there. We might as well just finish these units and we'll just brand them as our own game console. And that's how PlayStation was born. And then, like, right after Nintendo beat Sega, Sony jumped in the mix. Nintendo actually helped create the PlayStation brand, which was their biggest competition. And it came to bite them in the ass because the PlayStation 1 completely destroyed the Nintendo 64. In terms of like sales and just even like perception. Like the PlayStation console was like the cooler high-end consoles. It had games like, Resident Evil and like Final Fantasy 7, 7, 8, 9 really. It was a huge RPG machine. And again, it was just more of like, this is the cooler console to get than the kid-friendly Nintendo 64. So right when like the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation 1 came out, the PlayStation really, like Sony really kind of took a head on that. And then during the next generation, we had a newcomer into the console market, which was Xbox. So the next console war really boiled down to Nintendo with the GameCube, PlayStation with the PlayStation 2, and then Microsoft with the Xbox, the original Xbox. And this was like even though they had like one new contender in this console war, Sony kind of ran away with it. With the PlayStation 2 generation, I think it was the 6th generation of consoles, Sony ran away with it. The PlayStation 2 was just the best console on the market. It had the most games. Even though it might not have been as more powerful than the GameCube or the Xbox, it didn't matter because it just killed in software. And public perception, most people would agree, especially if you went back in the day, PlayStation 2 was just the better console. It was the better thing to have if you were a gamer. There was way more variety on PlayStation. The PlayStation 2 just fucking killed it. And it was a DVD player. That really helped push it over the edge. And, yeah, and this is like a distinct area where, after this, Nintendo kind of went off and did their own thing and kind of somehow became like a neutral party in the console wars. So after like the PlayStation 2, GameCube, and Xbox, Sony and Microsoft ended up competing with each other with the PlayStation 3 and 360, where Nintendo decided we're not going to compete directly with PlayStation and Microsoft anymore. We're just going to do our own thing. And they came up with the Wii, and the Wii's gimmick was the motion controls. So Nintendo's stance now became more of like, we're going to make fun, unique ideas, not compete in terms of like graphics or gameplay performance or things like that. We're actually going to stand back. We're actually going to use older technology, but put like a fun twist to it, like the motion controls for the Wii, and just do our own thing. So as the console wars went on from that point, it was really just between Microsoft and Sony with Xbox and PlayStation, where Nintendo was kind of competing with them, but not like directly. It was more of like an indirect competition where Nintendo's making like their own games and they stick to like their own kind of field. So the console wars really just boiled down between Xbox and PlayStation. And during the, I guess, 7th generation with the PlayStation 3 and 360, Xbox got the best of Sony during this one. And there were several reasons for this. One, the PS3's launch was terrible. It was very expensive. Sony's like mentality with the PlayStation 3 too really hurt it. They got very like greedy and just very arrogant. Basically saying that like, well, only real gamers can afford a PlayStation 3. If you're too poor, you shouldn't be playing our game. Very similar to a modern day example is Borderlands 4, with like how the creator is handling people like criticizing the game and basically just saying, well, this is a premium game, and if your shitty computer can't handle it, that's on you. That was basically like Sony's mentality at the start of the PlayStation 3, and it really hurt it. And this was devastating because it was vital, because this is the generation where internet, like playing games online, digital storefronts started, like, were born, and losing that lead in the beginning was devastating because Microsoft and Xbox was able to grow their online brand with their Xbox Live service before Sony was. So everyone would just gravitate towards the 360 because that's where you go to play games with your friends. They had a better storefront. Even though the online for the PlayStation 3 was actually free, people would prefer to play on the Xbox just because it had a better experience, because more people adopted to that earlier than the PlayStation 3. Even though I think by the end of this generation, I think the PS3 outsold the 360, if I remember correctly. But the damage was done. Xbox kind of solidified their place on as like, this is where you go to play games online, and that was just devastating for Sony. So Sony took a big hit in this generation. Xbox definitely won that round. But then we go on to the next generation where we have the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox Series X, whatever that kind of generation was. And this is where Xbox fucked up. And like, weirdly, this generation was the generation of like poorly named consoles, because the naming convention that Xbox used was so fucking confusing. No one bought it, and they all went back and gravitated towards the PlayStation 4, and eventually the PlayStation 4 just became like the dominant console of that generation. Everybody had a PlayStation 4. Everyone preferred to play the PlayStation 4 version of those games. Even if they weren't like the best version, there might have been some games that played better on Xbox. It didn't matter because the PlayStation 4 just became like the default console of that generation. And going back to terribly named systems, the Nintendo Wii, the Wii that was so successful by doing its own thing and not directly competing with, you know, the PlayStation 3 or 360, Nintendo decided to make the Wii U, which was a huge flop, and it was because of the naming convention. Because even to this day, people think the Wii U is just a controller for the Wii. And that bad marketing, that terrible naming convention, where they should have just named it the Wii 2 for the 2 screens you had with it, was just kind of ridiculous. And it honestly tanked the Wii U. Having that poor name, not being clear with your marketing, tanked it. So Nintendo really struggled in this generation. But then eventually, the Wii U had a very short lifespan, and then Nintendo created the Switch, and the Switch just brought Nintendo back to the fucking top. That handheld, like console, handheld hybrid idea was brilliant. And it really brought Nintendo back on the playing field of being like a real big contender. But again, it was competing with, like the Switch was able to compete with the PlayStation 4 and like the Xbox because of its portability. And it was so good, such a good idea. It honestly brought Nintendo... It did a weird thing where Nintendo was able to compete with these higher-end consoles with lower-end tech. And just because it was just such a good gimmick and a good idea. So that's kind of why Nintendo was, like, thriving so much. It was because of the Switch. And the PlayStation 4 became kind of like the real winning console there. And then that led into the generation that we are right now with the PlayStation 5, whatever the fuck you call an Xbox now, and the Nintendo Switch 2. And now the Nintendo Switch 2, again, I don't think it's doing as hot as the first Switch did, because they really didn't change like the big gimmick with it. It's pretty much just the Switch 1, just bigger and better. Which is good, you know, but the PlayStation 5 is definitely just running away with it. And in this generation, this is where Xbox has kind of just bowed out. I don't think Microsoft or the Xbox brand is going to be it's going to be around, but I think they're just going to do what Sega did and just switch to being a publisher and just have their games that they publish be on all the consoles, whether it be on PC, Nintendo, even PlayStation. I think they're going the route of Sega and just bowing out of making hardware, being a brand. Whoops, that's the first time I ever dropped my fucking sword in a video. But, yeah, and I dropped it because I was talking about Xbox, and I hate Xbox. But, anyway, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, no, I think Xbox is just kind of officially bowed out. They're just going to stick to, just being a publisher from now on, doing their, like, Xbox Game Pass, and just being kind of like a service rather than a hardware console. So that's it. So really, it's just left to, like, PlayStation now. And now, this entire video, I've left out PC, like gaming on PC, because PC gaming has always kind of been its own thing. It never really directly competed with, like, console. But recently that has changed with things like the Steam Deck, and now that games are coming out, like, multi-plat, where, like, Steam is just a, like, platform for games to come out on. Now, like, PC gaming is becoming more of a platform, and I think down the road, PC gaming is just going to win, because they're eventually going to make some sort of PC gaming handheld that just works. And, like, for me personally, I don't even have a PlayStation 5, and a big reason for that is because I own a Steam Deck and a GDP Win 4, and I use that as, like, my big main, like, modern consoles now. And I don't feel the need to get a PlayStation 5. And I think the death of the console wars, now that they're kind of, like, officially over, I think we're going to go into, like, kind of like a bad state in gaming, where we're going to, like, exclusivity is going to go away, but with that, we're going to get worse games. Like, it's going to be worse for the gaming industry as a whole. because the console wars was basically just competition, and competition always makes everything better. And having that brand loyalty is really a good thing. It really helped thrive creativity and like gaming identity as well. Like, again, and the best way to acquit it is, like, can you imagine, like, sports, if there was a big notion that, like, we shouldn't have all these different teams, we should all just have, like, 2 teams, and we just celebrate the team that wins. We should, like, because all of this, like, brand loyalty to, like, if you liked baseball, like the Yankees, we should get rid of that, because there's a lot of hostility, and it's not really fun, and, you know, and it's just, like, that's the kind of mindset people have towards, like, gaming now, where it's like, no, let's get rid of this brand identity, let's get rid of this fanboyism. But again, it's just like going into, like, a sport and saying, you should stop liking your team and just appreciate the game. And it's just like, no, go fuck yourself. So yeah, that's pretty much, like, my little recap on the console wars. I think now that they're kind of, like, officially over, I think it's going to be a detriment in the long run to gaming. I think this whole, like, homogenization of, like, the gaming industry, kind of them all kind of consolidating into maybe, like, one gaming device, is going to be bad for the long term. But other than that, guys, I'm Shin05T5. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Love to talk to you guys about it. And other than that, I'll see you in the next one. Okay, thanks, bye. Later.